Chris Mackowski of Emerging Civil War. I am in southwest Missouri at Wilson's Creek National Battlefield. I'm getting a few videos here exploring the Trans-Mississippi just a little bit, checking some things off my bucket list, and we're going to start with the August 1861 battle here at Wilson's Creek. As always, best place to start is the visitor center to get yourself oriented. As you walk up, there are blocks in the sidewalk that show stepping stones on the road from the Missouri Compromise all the way up to the Battle of Wilson's Creek, with the key events along the way. The museum inside does a good job of contextualizing the Missouri question, introducing key players in its story, summarizing the role of Missouri during the war, and emphasizing the nastiness of the partisan warfare that took place there. It also, of course, summarizes the Battle of Wilson's Creek. So if we come out onto the battlefield itself, the park tour is about 4.5 miles in a big clockwise loop. It's going to bring you to kind of the portion of the field where Nathaniel Lyon's portion of the army is going to attack. At the southern end of the loop is where Franz Sigel's portion of the Federal Army is going to attack. The armies come here because all sorts of activity up around St. Louis and the U.S. arsenal that Lyon protects, and then he's going to install a pro-Union state government, which is going to drive Confederate forces out of Jefferson City, and it's going to really kind of concentrate Confederates in the southwestern part of the state. And Lyon decides he's going to march out to meet them in July. In the meantime, Confederates are trying to figure out what they want to do. There is a Confederate militia under Sterling Price of about 5,000 guys. He's going to get some reinforcements under Ben McCullough, some Texas and Arkansans who are going to join up, so bring up the Confederate forces to 13,000 guys. Lyon knows that he is outnumbered. He knows he has some of his men's enlistments expiring, and so he wants to take the offensive, hoping to catch the Confederates off guard and surprise them. And so that's what's going to lead to this August 10th battle in 1861. Tour route crosses over Wilson's Creek itself, which was an important source of water for the armies as they were encamped here. I'm not going to get down there along the banks, snakes and critters and all that kind of stuff. You get the idea, though. Stream, water, creek, important. Just up from the bridge is the first tour stop, Gibson's Mill. The Gibsons had a little mill right down next to the creek. On the 9th of August, suddenly the Confederate Army shows up around them. They're going to wait out the battle in their cellar. This is going to be kind of the northern end of the Confederate camp, so most of the battle is going to then kind of be stretched off in that direction and in that direction. The Ray cornfield here at Wilson's Creek is to this battle as the Miller's cornfield is to Antietam, the scene of intense, up-close, awful fighting. At about 6:30, Nathaniel Lyon's going to send his U.S. regulars, about 300 men, to protect his left flank. They're going to be met by about 900 Louisianans and Arkansans that Ben McCullough is going to use kind of as his shock troops, as the film in the Visitor Center describes it. So it's going to be a pretty intense battle here. And it's going to last about 20 minutes before the Federals, exposed out in that cornfield, have to melt away. Tour stop 2 on the driving tour is the Ray House. I'm going to cover that in its own video because it's really got some cool history to it, but I just want to give it a shout out since we're following that tour road chronologically. So if I keep coming around the tour route, I'm eventually going to get to Franz Sigel's side of the battlefield. And the way this was supposed to work is that Sigel's supposed to come with about 1,400 men and attack from the south and kind of serve as a big pincer movement to drive the Confederates toward Nathaniel Lyon's position on what becomes Bloody Hill and kind of trap the Confederates in between. And so Sigel's going to start off in that direction, eventually move, and this is going to be kind of his final position, the final of 3 positions that are marked on the park's tour road. As he takes position, he's been very effective with his artillery up to this point. I urge you to check out a video that we have from Devin Somerville that talks about Franz Sigel's performance here as an artillerist is really effective. But as he gets into this area, there are going to be Confederates approaching from behind the camera up into this direction. And they're wearing gray, which is no surprise, but there are Federals under Sigel wearing gray. This is still early in the war. There are a lot of things that have not been standardized, including uniform color. And so a lot of the troops that Sigel is commanding are wearing gray uniforms, so they see these advancing Confederates as friendlies, and they don't open on them, and that allows the Confederates to get right up in here and then start blazing away. And so that is going to force Sigel to eventually fall back. Now, that becomes especially problematic because on the other side of the battlefield, Nathaniel Lyon is still fighting, and he thinks that Sigel's still kind of pushing in his direction. He's got 4,000 guys on Bloody Hill, and he thinks he's got these other 1,400 guys he can call on, and he doesn't. And as we'll talk about at our next tour stop, that's going to cause some problems. Sigel is going to fall back with his forces all the way to Springfield. One of the rangers here today, in fact, told me that Sigel's one of the first people back to Springfield, which is a little bit embarrassing for the guy whose men say, "I fights mit Sigel," except Sigel's not fighting, he's back in Springfield. So kind of an interesting component here. Again, most people know Sigel for his actions out in the East. He'll get transferred out there, serve under Pope as part of the Army of Virginia. He'll have a brief appearance as his men get transferred to the Army of the Potomac, but Joe Hooker doesn't like him, so he ousts him in favor of Oliver Otis Howard. And then, of course, we know Sigel probably best for losing the Battle of New Market. But here he does some things that are effective, and he's a very good recruiter, and he's very good at rallying his men. They do really admire him and respond to his leadership. But here at Wilson Creek, he's got an opportunity, doesn't quite follow through, and then he never really says why, never explains himself. And so that secret really, in some ways, dies with Nathaniel Lyon. If we continue up the tour road, we're going to get to Bloody Hill. And it seems like every battlefield's got to have a bloody something. A bloody lane, a bloody pond. Here at Wilson's Creek, it is Bloody Hill. This is where the epicenter of the fighting really took place. There are going to be some 1,400 casualties right around this immediate area. This is a section of guns that's commanded by Lieutenant George Sokolsky, one of my people. He is a recent graduate of West Point 4 months ago, and then he finds himself here perched atop this hill, and it really covers an entire swath of the Confederate front, and so he's able to hold off a lot of those Confederate assaults. This is where Nathaniel Lyon is going to be with his roughly 4,200 guys, and he's hoping for Franz Sigel to be kind of pushing the door closed on that hinge and driving him up this direction, and doesn't know that Sigel's guys have been pushed out of their positions. And so it's really a desperate stand for Lyon, whose men are outnumbered. He at one point gives up hope, and then he tries to rally himself, and he is going to then lead some Kansans on a charge to try to break Confederate momentum, and it's while he's leading that charge that he will be shot from his horse. If you come up here to Bloody Hill, there is a paved path about 3/4 of a mile long that will bring you past this battery, a couple other artillery positions. It'll take you out to the spot where Lyon was killed. There is a marker there. There's also a vast sinkhole in the ground. I'm told by the rangers here that these are the Ozarks. It's got a lot of limestone formations, a lot of caves under these grounds, and occasionally those caves open up as sinkholes, and that provided to be a perfect, if grisly, spot to bury the dead from both sides, and they're just going to be piled in that sinkhole. Eventually, they'll be there for years, and eventually they will be disinterred and taken to the National Cemetery that is created in Springfield. And Federals and Confederates will be buried side by side, separate sections of the cemetery, but part of the same cemetery, and unusual formation that you don't typically see in most national cemeteries. The casualties here are stunning. More than 10% of the Confederates will end up as casualties, and somewhere between 20 and 25% of the Federals. Just a staggering number. I think 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, depending on how you sort of count who's engaged at the time. That is a staggering number. This is the second major battle of the war, and even compared to Bull Run, it's just shocking because we're way out here in the West. People aren't paying quite as much attention as they are to what happened at Bull Run just a couple weeks earlier out in Virginia, so close to the federal capital. So this tends to get overlooked, but it is an incredible, stunning number of casualties, an important win for the Confederates, although they can't monopolize on their victory here. They are so beaten up by this battle that even though the Federals withdraw from the field, and they do so in good order, Confederates can't follow up on that victory, and it's going to take them some time to get themselves reassembled. There's going to be squabbling between their two commanders, Sterling Price and Ben McCullough, and they're going to go their separate ways rather than concentrate, consolidate, and push forward, and that's also going to cripple the Confederate effort here. So it will give the Federals the time they need to be able to recover and then take the offensive again. And by the time they get to Pea Ridge in March of '62, they'll effectively end organized Confederate resistance and free Missouri. Even though there's going to be fighting that's going to take place in Missouri all the way to the end of the war, it's terrible, terrible bushwhacking, neighbor versus neighbor, friend versus friend sort of fighting. And in fact, there'll be armed militia, paramilitary groups that'll fight in this area through the 1890s. So the war doesn't come to a neat and tidy end in Missouri the way it does at, say, Appomattox, where everyone's stacking arms and shaking hands and sharing rations and getting paroles and going home. If I continue up the park road, it brings me right back to the road that brought me in. And as it says on the park map, the route of Federal advance to the battlefield and the route of Federal withdrawal is the same. Samuel Sturgis, who is second in command, is going to take over for Nathaniel Lyons and lead an orderly retreat back to Springfield. That will earn him enough of a commendation to get transferred. He'll head out east. I'll see him again at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December '62. I want to give a special thank you to Ranger Clayton Hansen, who provided excellent hospitality and orientation when I was here. Big help getting me straightened out here on the battlefield. Also reminding me that it is Missouri here in this part of Missouri. It's Missouri elsewhere. So I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War at the Wilson Creek Battlefield. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.